Worship leaders need to adjust their expectations. Every situation and scenario you find yourself in is going to require you to adjust your expectations from your team to your congregation to your worship expectation to your definition of success to so many others. And then the other thing that a worship leader might do as you adjust, you might realize you need to give up some expectations because maybe those expectations are not worth fighting for right now, but might be worth fighting for later. And maybe you need to create new expectations. And then finally, if you're not communicating your expectations, then yes, your worship ministry will suck. Your worship ministry will even fall apart, and you have the potential. You will run the risk of losing people in the process because you're not communicating your expectations. This can be down to the very finite nature of how you're playing a particular song on any given Sunday, to the point of how a service order will flow, to the point of letting everyone around you know that this is what you expect Sunday to be like. Why? Because you're dealing with people. People are very complex, complicated creatures, and frankly, at the same time, fairly predictable. We all struggle with change. We're also very terrible at adapting to new situations. And for the most part, once we find something we like, we kind of ride it until it's dead. So the reality is, as we go through this experience, we have to learn to adjust our expectations to people, the church, the culture, and the congregation that we're serving. What might work for you in one church as an expectation may not work for you in another church in a different context. For example, if you were working in a Baptist church and you moved to a Catholic church, I'd imagine the expectations of you would be starkly contrasted from the expectations of a Catholic church versus Baptist church. Terrible example, but you get my point. Now, the second thing that worship leaders must do is they actually need to give up their expectations more than keep them. What do I mean by that? Worship leaders oftentimes will find themselves in this trap, in this pattern of having an expectation when they step into worship that if the worship team doesn't do fill in the blank, then worship was not successful. If the congregation doesn't participate at this specific level, worship wasn't successful. If we don't have X amount of people in each service, then worship wasn't successful. These expectations, whether they are stated, felt, or internalized, are all expectations that, frankly, may not always be realistic, and for that matter, probably should be given up. Lastly, and this is the most important one, worship leaders must communicate their expectations. Just like I said, if you're the kind of culture that has a midweek rehearsal and a rehearsal on Sunday, communicate that expectation. If you have an expectation that people show up on time, that they know their music, maybe even memorize their music, then communicate that expectation. If you walk through your ministry and just kind of expect people to do this thing for you, not realizing that you might be the only person in the scenario where you are getting paid to do this thing and everybody else is doing it voluntarily, i.e. it is not their job, so they don't actually treat it with the same level of professionalism as they do with their actual job, then yeah, you need to communicate your expectations.